Hey everyone, Harold Fisher here, anchor and host of the Daily Drum on WHUR, and welcome to yet another edition of HUR at Home on WHUR.com and all of our social media platforms. Tonight on HUR at Home, we're talking about your money. And my guest is financial planner Cristina Briboneria. Cristina, thanks for joining the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Harold.
Absolutely. So 2020 has been a difficult year for a lot of people. Some people have lost their jobs, and even those who have kept their jobs are wondering how to handle their finances because of some changes that they've had to make because of the pandemic. When you are dealing with your clients, talk to me about what their biggest concern is for 2020 going into 2021.
Yeah, that's a great question, Harold. We've seen some major changes in the financial industry because of the global pandemic, and a lot of clients have been uncertain about their future income streams, about bonuses, and there are a few things that I would say a lot of people are concerned about and are planning for. So the first is really making sure that they have enough cash reserve in case they do get laid off or they don't receive that bonus that they normally expect each year. The second is the volatility that we're seeing in the stock market. Many people actually rely on their investments to help with income or future goals that they have. And so they are concerned about the market. And then third, a lot of the cash flow that they have because they might have lost their jobs has gone away. And so they are really concerned about some of the federal regulations that might be passing over the next several weeks. And hopefully we see that get passed sooner than later.
Well, let's talk a little bit about federal issues. Taxes, obviously a big issue for a lot of people. There are only a few weeks left in the year. So when it comes to taxes in 2020, what should people start doing now so they aren't caught, unaware after the first of the year?
Yeah, there are actually three major things that I've been recommending for clients to do from a tax planning standpoint to really save them hundreds to almost thousands of dollars in taxes before year end. The first would be consider maxing out your retirement plan through work if you have the cash flow to do it. And especially if it's a pre-tax 401k or 403b. Every $1,000 that a person puts into their 401k pre-tax will potentially save them almost 30% in taxes, depending on what state they live in or their federal tax bracket. The second is if you are charitably inclined, and many people are, whether you volunteer or you're giving non-cash donations to Goodwill, make sure you pick up your receipts. You'll be surprised how many people forget to pick up their donation receipts, whether it's cash or non-cash. And then the third is that if you own a business, whether it's a side hustle or like an actual a corporation that you own that's a side business for you, make sure you're capturing all of those expenses for that business. And by doing those three things, you could, again, as I mentioned, save hundreds to thousands of dollars on your tax return.
You just brought something up and this is another one of those 2020 specific kinds of situations. A lot of people who normally would work in an office were forced to work from home. And many of them are still working from home. They started working from home in March. They're still working from home. Are there any advantages or anything that can be deducted because all of a sudden, for the first time, even if you don't have a business at home, that you are now working from home?
It depends. And the reason I say that is because of the 2017 Tax Cut and Job Reforms Act that passed, certain expenses for people who have W-2 jobs were actually eliminated. So for people who have W-2 incomes, they have an employer, they get the W-2, their employer withholds taxes from them. Unfortunately, with current tax law, they cannot deduct their income, or excuse me, they can't deduct any work from home expenses. The caveat here, and this is where, as I mentioned, if you do have a 1099 job or a side hustle of some sorts, then all of those expenses can't actually be deducted. So if you started a side business because you needed more income through Etsy or Pinterest, or started doing an Uber driving or Uber Eats, all of those jobs are considered 1099, and you can actually deduct that 100% off of your taxes.
One of the things that when you talk about deductions, some people who may not be able to deduct charitable contributions can take up to $300 in deductions. Explain that.
Yeah, so because of COVID-19, there was legislation passed that was for and really favoring towards charitable contributions, and they wanted to help nonprofit organizations. And because of that legislation, people who normally would not get to deduct their cash contributions have the ability to deduct up to $300 for 2020. So if you normally do not get to deduct your through itemized deductions on your taxes, you can still deduct up to $300 off of your income if you've given cash charitably this year.
But why wouldn't you normally be able to do that? I thought that anyone who made a cash contribution, whether it be to their house of worship or to a charitable nonprofit, that they would be able to just deduct it. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually part of the last 2 years of reform, tax reform and tax law that's been changed, that people were really unaware of. So most of your itemized deductions, so basically a person, just by being a person, they get what's called a standard deduction. So for a person who's filing single, just by being around, you get a $12,000 standard deduction. Now, if your itemized deductions are not over that $12,000, and your itemized deductions generally include property taxes, income taxes, charitable contributions. So if those things don't equal or total more than 12,000, then generally most people can't take that itemized deduction.
So what about because I would imagine and I remember and I've done it myself in years past after Christmas there's this rush to go to the Salvation Army to get rid of old clothes or other kinds of things, so that doesn't help anymore.
Only if you're taking an itemized deduction. So the rule for non-cash charitable contributions, and again, that was actually another change for this year, is now for receipts, you can take up to $5,000 of non-cash charitable deductions or non-cash gifts as a deduction. Anything over 5,000, now you actually have to have it appraised. So like you have to have a licensed appraiser to take anything more than that.
Mm-hmm. I see. What other tips would you recommend that people do? You mentioned retirement plans and the like, and we've gone over deductions. What other things should someone do if they're trying to get their financial house in order, considering the uncertainty that 2021 may bring?
So the first, definitely build up their cash reserve. Typically, I recommend that clients have at least 3 to 6 months of their mandatory expenses in their checking or savings. So if they do get laid off, there is an emergency, car breaks down, water heater breaks down, they have that in cash and are able to pay for those expenses. And the other part of preparing is also just reviewing your overall budget. So one of the things I wanted to also share, because of the COVID relief that we've seen, there are certain expenses that were actually deferred or forbeared this year. So, for example, student loans for the last 6 or 7 months have been at 0% interest and 0% payments. What I don't think people realize is that was extended until the end of this year, but because legislation hasn't passed, unfortunately, January 1st, those student loans are going to be coming back up. In addition, pandemic unemployment relief is going to expire December 26th as well. So it's going to be really important for people to review their expenses and determine how much of a cash reserve they can have in place.
I want to ask you about the cash reserve because we've been hearing that kind of advice for many, many years, but I guess that is 3 to 6 months is a lot of money. It is a lot of money, and I cannot imagine. To be quite honest, I don't know anyone who has 3 to 6 months of cash reserve unless they're already debt free. And so, if you are not debt free, how do you save 3 to 6 months when being a practical person would suggest if you have 3 months saved up, then you would take that 3 months and put it on a credit card bill or a student loan or something, or your car note or something like that. It seems a little counterintuitive.
Absolutely. And I completely understand, why sometimes that may seem counterintuitive. Typically, it also depends on the interest rates on the credit cards. So there are probably strategies for folks that are out there where if they have decent credit and they have credit cards that are outstanding, there are ways that either one, they can call the credit card company to see if they can reduce the interest on their loan. Secondly, possibly refinance to a lower interest rate. So sometimes you can do a balance transfer from, let's say your interest rate is 17%, but if you can do a balance transfer to maybe a 0% or lower interest rate loan, that's a way to like free up cash. And part of it is, sometimes having that balance. So determining, what is that expense or cash reserve number you should have, and in what time frame do you want to pay that debt off, is where sometimes we see that balance happen, like doing a little bit of both.
Yeah. Or, certainly, for me, if you've had a child who has graduated from college and has a job, put them to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Make them make that money. Yeah.
Crack the whip.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Cristina, for people who are interested in finding out more about you and finding out where they can connect with you to get more financial resources, how can they find you?
They can actually follow me on Facebook at CristinaBriboneria.com, or excuse me, Cristina Briboneria. They can go to my website, CristinaBriboneria.com, or follow me on Instagram at Cristina, Cristina 23B. And I will have tons of tips on there on a daily basis.
And for people who are not familiar with the musicality of your last name, could you spell that for us, please?
It's Briboneria. So B as in boy, Riboneria.
Okay, and Cristina is Cristina.
Yep, Cristina with no H.
Yeah, there you go. Cristina Briboneria. I got it right. Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, and I certainly hope that you and your family continues to prosper, and also to certainly be safe.
Thank you so much. And, blessings to everyone. And, thank you so much for having me on again.
Absolutely. That is financial planner Cristina Briboneria. And I want to thank all of you for listening to us for this edition of HUR at Home. It's on all of our social media platforms. I'm Harold Fisher. As always, I'll see you on the radio.